On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're recapping the win against Carolina and looking towards tonight's game against Colorado. All that coming up on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Tanker. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Locked On Lightning. We'd also like to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. On this episode, we're taking a look back on the previous win against Carolina, winning 8-2 big on the road. We also talk about Andrei Vasilevskiy's debut, how we feel about that thus far. It's one game. We're not going to overreact. And then we're also going to take a look at tonight's game against the Colorado Avalanche. That definitely will make for an interesting matchup tonight and a little bit of a heat check, if you want to call it there, for the Lightning. We'll get into all of that. But first, I just want to ask you all, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. You could also subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Go ahead and do that. If you want to drop a comment below, or if you want to reach out to the show, you could do that under this video, or you could go ahead and follow us on our Twitter page, LO_Lightning, as well as LockedOn_Lightning on Instagram. So, initial thoughts from the game over the weekend. I will say I did miss the ball on this. I did not have I just didn't have a good feelings coming into this game. The Lightning have been, I will say, to start off, to preface that, and maybe it was just more so my own insecurities about how this team has been playing, dating all the way back to opening night. This team has turned a corner for me, at least in the month of November. And just a recap, they lose a game 4-2 to the Blue Jackets, who I think I said it at the time, and I kind of spoke about it, I think the week or two afterwards, as well as that's going to be a game where, when the Lightning did get things going, which I know at times I also said that, like, this team looked like they didn't deserve to make the playoffs, and that's true. I think that this team played so badly at certain times, mentioning the 6-5 overtime loss to the Maple Leafs, that this team will look back on the Blue Jackets loss and the Maple Leafs loss, and definitely, the Black. I mean, we could go on some of them, but I think the Blue Jackets one was definitely a loss that really hit me in terms of this team not playing well, not playing consistent, not doing what they were supposed to do. And kind of the game plan going into this season was just to, let's bide our time. Let's wait for Vazzy to come back. And this team, I think since then, I think the Edmonton win on the 18th, and then following that up with an overtime win against the Bruins, I really think we started to see the Lightning realize what works for them. It's not always going to be clear cut for this team. As we all know, the team is ever going to be changing in terms of how they go about doing their business on any given night. And sometimes it might be personnel, it might be a reason or an instance of just who they're playing on that night. But I think we could all agree that the Lightning turned things on at the right time. Like I said, the Edmonton win, the OT, the big win, which I felt like was their best one of the season against Boston. You take a little bit of a step back against Winnipeg, and I stressed going into these final couple of weeks of November how important it was for this team to really get things going, and how winnable really the remaining schedule of November was. And Yeah, I had a bad feeling about this game because of how things went against Winnipeg, a team I feel that on paper can beat you. On the ice could definitely be a team that very similar to the Lightning to some degree. They may not have the star power in terms of scoring, but what they do have is they have a very good goaltender, Connor Hellebuck, and they're kind of like, in a way, to me, sometimes, depending on any get like they're a Jekyll Hyde team. They kind of remind me of Carolina, but with like a better goaltending situation because they got a good number of players on that team that can go out there and win a game for them. And it's not just one line, it's not two lines. For the most part, it's all four lines plus the three defensive combos. And that was a little bit of a hiccup there. It happens. But you go into a matchup, like I said, opponent that is somewhat similar and a team that, for the most part, I think this year, despite the shutout loss earlier in the month, a team that I think that really the Lightning have looked better this year than they have in previous seasons against. And I stressed ahead of this game how important it was for the Lightning to really get things going early on. Now they give up the early goal. At this point, it's almost expected with this team. It happens. But the thing that I can say that the Lightning have done a very good job of, and you saw it in Edmonton, you saw it against the Boston win, is their ability now to respond. And, for some of the faults that they may have and will have in the future, I think that we could all hang our hat on the fact that this team has done such a phenomenal job in the last week or so and have won some pretty big games. Despite how you feel about Edmonton, anytime you play those guys and getting into a little bit of a back and forth with them, and on top of that, you don't have your top goaltender. You keep one of the best players on the planet scoreless. I think that's a huge win. That's a big win for this team, and it shows me a lot. It shows their perseverance, shows their discipline, and it shows their focus, especially where they're at in the season, and at certain times how far they have fallen, and the fact that they've been able to pick themselves up and get things on the right track, and to go out there and not only beat these guys, but to do it in a way, not only when you have your best player on the team on paper coming back, and he's going to be a little rusty, and we'll get into that in the next segment. But you go out there and you put him on your back, and the Lightning, by the way, do it on 14 shots. That's 8 goals on 14 shots on goal. That's insane. I saw a stat the other day. I believe that's the most efficient a team has been, goals versus shots on goal ever in a game, which, let's not get comfortable seeing the Lightning win games like this because it's not going to happen, but we could all enjoy it. But this team has really given me a lot of positive vibes with the way they've been playing. And I think that adding Vasilevskiy to that mix with the potential that we all expect of him suddenly changes things exponentially for the Tampa Bay Lightning. They go from a team that at one point this year, really 2 weeks ago, looked like a team that was a fringe playoff team, to a team now that is a threat to be a sure thing in the final. A team that they get hot at the right time, as we all know, we've seen this team do in the playoffs. They get hot at the right time, and then bam. Now we're talking about, can this team get another Stanley Cup? And yeah, this is November. We're still talking about, it's only November. But if you've been a listener of this podcast for a very long time, or even this year, my stance on this when we're looking and evaluating at this team to start the season. What is kind of the cutoff? And the Lightning do get a little bit of a grace period because they've been without one of their major pieces to start the season. Really, what you see is what you get by the holidays, American Thanksgiving, and then Christmas into New Year. I think the Lightning get a little bit of an extension on that. We could probably say maybe Martin Luther King Day, Valentine's Day, the latest. What you see out of this team is what you get. And the reason why I'm adding a little bit more of an extension, even into Valentine's Day / I guess President's Day, is because it's going to take Vasilevskiy, if he does show, and he made some good saves in this game, but at the same time, Carolina didn't really show up. They were kind of just overwhelmed by everything the Lightning were doing. But it's going to take him maybe a month or so to really get back to his form. There's going to be a couple of games that are going to be bumpy for him, and there's going to be a couple of games that are really going to test to see where he is once he's had a couple of games underneath his belt. So we'll get into that coming up on the next segment, but a phenomenal win on the road. I thought the Lightning played very well. The most positive thing we could take from this game, other than the fact that they scored 8 goals on 14 shots, was the fact that their passing was immaculate. And that's really the thing that led to all these goals. So hopefully they could bring that in tonight's game against the Colorado Avalanche. We'll talk about that to go ahead and wrap up the episode when we get to that point. But first, we're going to get into Vasilevskiy. But before we even get into Vasilevskiy, I want to talk about our sponsor, and that is our friends over at collective.com. Now, if you haven't heard of collective.com, listen up. Okay. They are great for anybody that has a small business. If you run a small business, a solo small business, you're an army of one. And we love small businesses here on Locked On Lightning, but you still need a CPA, bookkeeper, separate payroll solution, and more. Let Collective take care of your paperwork while you take care of business. Collective is the #1 financial solution for freelancers, contractors, and self-employed entrepreneurs that lets you focus on your passion, not your paperwork. Let Collective handle all the paperwork you dread, like corporate formation, compliance, taxes, bookkeeping, accounting, and even payroll. And the best part, it's at a fraction of the cost of a CPA. So right now, Collective is offering 1 month free and no onboarding fee when you go to collective.com/LockedOnNHL and tell them Locked On NHL sent you. That's a $550 value for free when you go to collective.com/LockedOnNHL and tell them Locked On NHL sent you. That's collective.com/LockedOnNHL. Tell them Locked On NHL sent you. So before we get into everything, I want to thank everybody, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. And if you haven't already done so, go ahead, hit that subscribe button if you're watching us on YouTube, or hit that follow button, whether it be on any audio platform. That's Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you're listening to us. Hit it and hit that notification bell. So as soon as the newest episode drops, you'll be notified that it is, and you can listen, download, all that fun stuff. So the Lightning are coming off a big win, and obviously the biggest storyline getting into this and was Andrei Vasilevskiy making a season debut. And I will say first off that I was pleasantly surprised that he came back when he did. Now, we did get confirmation prior to that, or John Cooper did state, let's not say confirmation, but let's say that John Cooper did say that, I believe it was after Thanksgiving, that he was going to show up. And when he says that, I assumed he meant like the week after Thanksgiving. Like, I didn't realize that he meant like literally after Thanksgiving. And what a better test than against a team like the Carolina Hurricanes, who, like I've always said, are a team that I very much admire, and a team that I very much enjoy when they're not playing the Lightning. I love watching them do what they do, and they win games the right way. And that was a good first test. You're kind of throwing him into the fire right away, which is not a bad thing, especially for a guy who you want to get him going early on. You don't want to roll him out there against a team that is not very good. You want to roll him out there against a team that is one of the top teams in the league. I mean, the Hurricanes are second in the Metropolitan Division, and if you follow the standings, you know that the Metropolitan Division is probably one of the best divisions out there in the NHL. So for to roll Vazzy out there, I will say right off the bat against a team like that, very ballsy, but very much needed for this Tampa Bay Lightning team. Because for as much of a good job Johansson has done, and at times Matt Tompkins as well has done to start the season to kind of hold it down until he's come back, it's not the same. Then again, if we get kind of what we saw from Vazzy last year, then it's going to be a little bit of a notch up, which we'll cross that bridge when we get there if we need to discuss it. But this was a game where, and I'm not downplaying his performance, he played very well. There was a lot of opportunities that Carolina had here and there, but at the end of the day, he faced 24 shots. And the Lightning played one of their better games of the season. I would say this is probably in the top 5. I would have liked to have seen how he performed in a very volatile atmosphere. For example, the prior game earlier last week against Boston, I think that would have been cool, just kind of get him back into the mix there. In a game like that where Boston is just, we all know that's just always an incredibly intense game. So it's going to be interesting to see tonight, I think, and I say this fully assuming that he is going to play tonight against the Colorado Avalanche, and then Johansson will probably play tomorrow night against the Arizona Coyotes in the back-to-back. I'm very curious to see how he responds, because going from Carolina to Colorado, and I will say that also that we may not see Nathan MacKinnon tonight. He did not practice with the team earlier on in the day, so question mark. Haven't heard anything about whether or not he's going to play. I would assume if he's not practicing, if he's not on the ice, chances are he's probably not going to play tonight, which I'm not mad about. But at the same time, you always want to, especially when you're rolling back a guy like Vasilevskiy, this is game 2 for him, you want to face the other team's best. And Nathan MacKinnon is definitely not only that team's best, but he's probably top 3, top 5 in the league, definitely top 3. So it's, we'll have to take what we could get. And I would say through the first maybe 5 games or so, we're going to see some bad goals. We saw one in the Carolina game. I believe it was the first goal of the game against Carolina. I believe that was Nozen. A shot that I think, on his best day, he probably would have saved. It was a little bit of a weird bounce there, but I think that, it's something that the Lightning are just going to have to deal with. But that's why I'm so excited about how they played, because the last couple of games, I really think that they have done a phenomenal job in picking up their goaltenders, whereas in seasons past, really, it's been pretty much the opposite for the most part. I mean, the last 2 years at least, Lightning have been shaky, and especially last year, they kind of, on most nights when they kind of knew that they didn't have it early on or got off to their slow starts, as we are accustomed to at this point, that they looked at Vasilevskiy and he wasn't his best either. He wasn't his dominant self. I mean, the numbers were still there, but he wasn't that otherworldly goaltender that we're accustomed to. Now, is he going to be that this year, especially being a little bit more refreshed than what he normally is at this point in the season? I don't know if that really makes a big difference. might very well at the end of the season as we get towards the playoffs, especially into the playoffs. That's going to be a big difference for him. A little bit extra in the tank than what he's accustomed to, other than playing a full season. But it really depends on him. The Lightning could only do so much in front of him, but if he's going to go out there and play to the level that we've seen him play in years past, he's got to buckle down early on. He's just got to be better. He's just got to, and the key factor is, and I'm not sitting here trying to be a goaltender expert, not at all, but I think the thing that he struggled with last season was his positioning. I feel like there was a lot of times where he just overextended himself and then he left the other side open, and blocker side was another thing that he was really struggling with last year, letting up a lot of goals, and the whole league knew it. I think if there was a highlight tape, which if you explore the depths of YouTube, I'm sure you could find it, but I would probably say maybe 75% of the goals he gave up last year were blocker side. And that's just something he needs to do better. And teams are going to score on him. They're going to shoot that way every chance they get. And he's just, it's more so of a thing now where should be expecting it at this point. He should have been practicing it when he was able to do drills and all that stuff. And I'm sure he did. I would be very shocked if it came out at some point saying, no, that wasn't really a point of concern for him, but we'll see. I mean, like I said, I expect great things from him. I don't expect it to come right away. I don't expect him to get a shutout tonight. I don't expect him to get a shutout for maybe the next couple of weeks or so. It's going to be one of those nights where I think it's going to be very unexpected. I think it's going to come. It could very well come right off of a bad performance. I think we're going to see a lot more bad performances in the next couple of weeks out of him than we are going to see good performances from him. Because, like I said, he's coming right off the couch. And some of you might say, well, he's been practicing with the team. He's been doing this and that. And we all know at this point that don't mean literally, because you can't replicate game speed, especially in practice with your teammates, where they're not going to be shooting at him like he's an opposing goaltender. At the end of the day, that's their teammate, and they may not be going as hard at him as they would an opposing goaltender. So it's going to be a learning process. The Lightning fans and the players around him are going to have to be very, very patient, and I'm sure the guys know that, and I'm sure he knows that. But and I'm knowing him and what kind of person he is and how competitive he is, I know he's going to be really putting a lot of pressure on himself to get back to what he was right away. But I wouldn't expect anything phenomenal out of him. We might see flashes of it throughout courses of games, and if he proves me wrong, I think that's fine. I mean, I'd be very pleasantly surprised. All it does is benefit the team, but I'm just trying to manage my expectations and everybody's expectations. So write down in the comments below on our YouTube page underneath this video, what do you think of Vasilevskiy? How do you feel about how he played in that game against Carolina? How he's going to perform in the next coming weeks? I think that's going to be really telling of, possibly even, like I said, even extend it over into January, February. I think he's going to get a little bit more of a leash in terms of whether or not he's back or not when we determine his performance. So we'll wrap things up with talking about tonight's game against the Colorado Avalanche in just a bit. But first, I want to end it with our friends over at the Sleeper app. Now, if you haven't heard about the Sleeper app, listen up, because it's this phenomenal app. You could play daily fantasy picks, or you could have a fantasy team like I do with hockey and football. Now, a new NHL season brings all sorts of possibilities. Nikita Kucherov, who could score 50 goals. Lightning could hoist the Stanley Cup, especially now that Vasilevskiy's back. And you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey. With the Sleeper, you could win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy contests What player should you take this week to win? I would probably say Kucherov. I mean, he's been playing phenomenal, been passing the puck like just something out of a video game. I mean, Stamkos 4 goals in 4 straight games with goals. I mean, you can't go wrong with that. He is hot. All the stars showed up in the last game, and I will expect them to show up tonight against the Colorado Avalanche. So to win 100 times Bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Lightning fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your pick so you can start winning big. So go to Sleeper and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions applied. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details, locational availability. So wrapping things up on the show today, as always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen. And like I stated a couple of weeks ago, the Lightning, as tough as things may seem, the schedule, we had Boston, we had Carolina, we have the Penguins, coming up later this week. It doesn't get any easier. You have the Colorado Avalanche, who are, regardless of who's on their side of the ice, very, very well coached team, Jared Bednar. And they won't have Nathan McKinnon tonight. That's not confirmed, but everything I haven't seen anything discussing otherwise. But that doesn't matter because you have a lot of other players on this team that are definitely going to be a pain in the butt for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And the first name that comes to mind is Cal McCarr. And the Lightning are really going to have to buckle down on him. When I look at this team for Colorado, they're a team that really worries me because he's just has the talent. He kind of reminds me of like a bigger Nikita Kucherov, because what they both are able to do is they could just hold on to the puck for what seems like years and be able to just dangle around the entire ice. And the Lightning, with their struggles that they have had recently, and at certain times, we saw it on the first goal of the game against Carolina, their defensive struggles, they lose track of assignments. I think this is a game you're going to see a lot of man coverage from them. I would hope that they're not playing that defensive zoning. It's really not a tactic that I'm really happy about to see in any regard. I don't think that's something that really helps unless you have a team that's kind of just more plays the nitty-gritty style. I mean, the Avalanche are going to come right at you. And they know they got the weapons, and they're going to spread out the ice, and the Lightning are going to have to be ready. Valerie Natushkin, Mikko Rantanen, Thomas Tatar, Jonathan Drouin, Ryan Johnson, the list goes on. The one name that I hate to see on this other team is Ross Colton. As we know, the Lightning traded him in the offseason to relieve some cap space, got a draft pick back. Very curious to see how Ross plays. Everything I've heard from Chris Maselli and Kyle Sullivan at Locked On Avalanche, they love Ross, which means that he has been playing his game out there. I don't know how he is in terms of stats, but I know he's throwing his body around. He's playing very physical. So Ross has been through he's has 7 goals this year. He has and 10 points. It's kind of one of those things where it kind of makes you mad because when that whole thing happened, I wasn't a big fan of it because I thought Ross Colton was due for a bounce back year. And, it wasn't like the Lightning had to pay him a ton of money right away. And the fact that, he had such a big contribution in their history very recently, winning that game, scoring that game-winning goal, Game 5 against Montreal in the Stanley Cup Final. I wasn't a fan of that, and I wish that the Lightning were able to have a player like that this year, and unfortunately they don't. But I'm very curious to see if there's maybe going to be a little bit tension there, kind of We all know that Ross likes to play with his heart on his sleeve. He's going to show his emotions tonight. I'm very curious to see if he's going to try and throw his body around with the Lightning, and hopefully he doesn't go out there and make us pay for trading him away. But really, I think that the Lightning need to just go out there with the same game plan that they had against Carolina, against Boston, spread the ice around, look for the extra pass. The one thing I thought the Lightning did very well in the game against Carolina was utilizing the one-timer when you were drawing attention to yourself on the opposite side of the ice. That Kucherov and Stamkos duo really did a phenomenal job with that. Would like to see Braydon Point get involved once again. It was really nice seeing him score the other night. Not only score, but score 3 times to get a hat trick. Don't expect that to happen, but the Lightning need to play well in front of Vasilevskiy tonight. They need to get him going early on, allow him to settle in. I would expect he's going to face way more than 22 shots, 24 shots, actually. I would expect he's going to get a high volume of shots. I think Colorado is going to challenge him early on, and they're going to see, what Vasilevskiy shows up, and that's why the Lightning really need to buckle down and get ready because, facing the Colorado Avalanche is not like facing Carolina. I think we could all agree that is definitely a higher step up when you go into Colorado, especially. I'm very curious to see how the elevation affects them. If we all remember correctly, that was an issue for them in that playoff series, in that final series, a couple of years ago. So not sure, but we'll see. The Lightning were there a couple days extra. I believe that, they were at the Broncos game. So I'm very curious to see if they look a little gassed early on today. And win or lose, I hope they play the right way, and then they could bring that playing style with them into tomorrow night's game against the Arizona Coyotes. So we'll be back tomorrow to talk about this game, win or lose, and then we'll look forward towards the game tomorrow night against the Arizona Coyotes. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Tanker. I'll talk to you in the next one.